Devin, you're good? Okay, all right. You are. That's so I want to just take half a second, and as we were singing, I realized something, and as the worship team was rehearsing this morning, I realized something, and I went up and I talked to Natanya this morning and told her I was proud of her. Some of you may not remember the shy little girl that showed up, and she was 9 years old. To see her up leading worship and singing, and the young woman that she has become, that is one of the things that we can see how God moves. We can see how God works. So thank you, Varghese and Preeti. Thank you for being amazing parents. And Natanya, thank you for allowing us to be a part of your journey as you grow. I don't always, yes, I do. I always embarrass people, but sometimes myself, and that's okay. That's what gives me the ability to be able to embarrass other people, because I'm not afraid to embarrass myself. The other thing that I noticed as we were singing was this thought came into my mind, and that is, we get two glimpses in Scripture of the throne room of heaven, in Isaiah 6 and in Revelation 4. And in both of them, there's a similar thing. They're singing. They're singing. What they're singing is amazing, because they're singing, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty." We have the opportunity to proclaim outside of the throne room of heaven that God is holy. We have the opportunity to proclaim it not with just our voice, but with our life, with the way that we live, with the things that we. Jim, hello. For those of you who do not know, this is Reverend Jim Joseph, and he was for a long time the pastor at the Assemblies of God Church in Two Harbors. And in fact, when I was interviewed to receive credentials, they asked me, "Why do you want to be a pastor?" And I said, "There's this little church up in Two Harbors, and I want to be the pastor of it." I was joking when I said it, because my best friend lived there, but welcome. So, we have the opportunity to live our life in front of people out loud, and they have the opportunity to see Jesus through us. And I don't ever want to miss that opportunity. So when I have the opportunity to sing as off key as I do, how great the Lord is, I'm going to. When I have the opportunity to speak about how good God is, I'm going to. Even if my life might be a living hell at the moment, I am still going to stand up and proclaim that God is good. But not this morning. This morning, I'm going to hand the microphone off to a friend. And we actually had this set up before Andrew even went in the hospital. We had talked about this in December and set this date up. But Phil and Denise Reed are missionaries in Ukraine. Their picture has been on our wall back here since before I was pastor. So they are missionaries that we have been supporting for a long time. It has been amazing to follow their journey. They were in Ukraine when the war started, and they had to evacuate. And I don't want to take too much of your story, but they had the opportunity to go back and minister in Poland, and now they're back in Ukraine. And I thought when we were talking that it was about time that we got to hear from you guys. So I will turn the microphone over to you.
Thank you, Pastor Troy. It's a joy to be here with you, Pastor Jim and Barbara. It's so good to see you guys. Did not expect that. Denise's, as Denise says, old roommate. But I said, yeah, she's just as old as you are. Roommate. Yeah, this is my new roommate. They went to North Central together, so they were roommates in college. And so her and her husband are here. We're really glad to have you guys here as well. It's a privilege to be here, and we aren't supposed to be here, quite honestly. But Denise's mom passed into eternity on December 24th. And so we got a call. It was evening. It was 5:30 our time. It was 9:30 here. And her sister called and said, Mom's gone. And she was 92 years old, served God since she was, 12 or something like that? So 16. So good long time she served God. Pastor's wife, and she'd been telling God lately, I'm ready to go. Take me, God. Oh, yeah, she got her license, credentials to preach when she was 70 years old. So good for her, right? And she wanted to do a wedding for somebody, so that's why she got credentials to do the wedding. But anyway, her mom was a character, I'll tell you that. And she actually, her mom and dad met at North Central when it was an institute in the early 50s. So that goes back a long time. But anyway, enough about them. So we ended up leaving Ukraine. I will tell you that getting in and out of Ukraine right now is not an easy task, because you can't fly in and out of Ukraine because nobody will insure airplanes that go in a war zone. So that means we have to drive or take a bus or take the train to get to Poland so we can actually fly. So the short story is that it took us 3.5 days to get to Iowa City. We drove 8.5 hours the first day, so we were an hour from the border because we live on the eastern side of Ukraine. And that morning we got up and got to the border by 9 o'clock, and there were already 57 vehicles ahead of us, and we were at the border almost 6.5 hours. And of course, people at the border, they're not always, the nicest people. And for some reason, we had to go to the special building where they had to have us take all our suitcases out, open all our suitcases up, and I'm like, okay, whatever. We'll just do it because we know. But we had our car x-rayed once. That was a lot easier than taking everything out. But they didn't find anything, of course, and on we went. But then we had 4 hours to drive to Warsaw, and we spent the night there, got up 2:30 in the morning so we could be to the airport by 4, and then got into Minneapolis at noon on that Saturday, the 28th. Pastor Troy, thank you for taking care of our car. He takes care of our car because, I'll tell you a little more about that later. But anyway, he takes care of our car, so whenever we come home, he volunteered. But anyway, so he meets us at the airport, or we come get our car, however it works out. And then he takes us to the airport and takes care of our car again. So, and the reason we kept our car is because we knew that there's a possibility we may need to be home for something like this. So anyway, it's a blessing. So thank you very much. And thank you for the opportunity to have us today. I know that God knew this way before we did. He had it all planned. Because when we came to the church to get the car, he had a funeral that day. And he said, well, how about you come and share the service before you fly out? We fly out on Tuesday this week. Okay, yeah, we'll make it work. And so then when he told me when Andrew's funeral was, I'm like, well, God planned that out. And he knew what was going to happen. So anyway, so then we got in, and then I was too tired. I couldn't sleep on the flight, so I could not drive to Iowa City. So then we were both sleeping by 9:30 that Saturday night, and then the morning we woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning, both of us. And so jet lag is a wonderful beast. You know that? It's just horrible. Oh, and then we have new friends here that we met that they have actually been in Ukraine and know some of the people that we know. So that's kind of cool. So I was a computer programmer for 20 years. And God, in his great wisdom, messed my life up. in a good way. I gave my life to Christ when I was 5 years old. People in Ukraine, it just blows their mind. How could you give your life to Christ when you're 5? You didn't understand everything. Well, you tell me one person who understood everything when they got saved, even as an adult, and then I'll concede, okay? But otherwise, I'm like, no, I gave my life to Christ. She was 4, so just whatever. And so for me, I already served God. I already did serve God in many different ways, but then God wanted more. He wanted my life, a living sacrifice, as Romans 12 says. And is it a sacrifice to be in Ukraine? Absolutely it is. Do we love it in Ukraine? Absolutely we do. When the war started and we had to leave, that's the last thing I wanted to do. And we were in America for 20 months. And I can tell you, I did not endure that time well. We used it well. We visited churches and shared because people really wanted to know about Ukraine. But I had a really hard time enduring that 20 months. And I know there was a reason. I don't know what it was. One thing I know, God was working on me, but I was not very patient. I actually got depressed, greatly depressed. And then finally we were able to go. And part of the reason that we ended up staying so long is because her dad had a stroke 2 years ago. And so the last 10 months or 9 months we were in America, we were dealing with stuff for her parents. We moved them to assisted living instead of independent living, senior living. Denise is financial power of attorney, so we had to go through all of that process and get things set up. And her mom actually allowed her to be financial power of attorney for her as well early because we didn't want her to be stressed about finances. And so we just take care of it. It's a lot easier. And ultimately, that just was a very difficult time. We planned on going to Poland in June, then it was going to be August, and then it was October. Finally, November, we got to. And I don't know about you, but I don't like to wait. I don't like stoplights, but I am the king of stoplights. I don't know what it is. My mom said God was trying to teach me patience, but anyway, it hasn't worked so far. But I don't like to wait because part of the reason is because I love Ukraine so much. And so for me, watching what God was doing in Ukraine, I'm like, God, I've lived there. I know these people. I want to help them. I want to help people come to know Jesus. I don't want to be a spectator. But while we were in the States those 20 months, we visited a lot of churches, and we were able to use some of those funds. Actually, half of the offering that we got, we gave to Ukraine Aid and passed it on to the pastors. And they told me when we got there, you sent aid at just the right time. Just when we needed some money for something, you sent some money. And so that was only the faithfulness of God because I was obedient. I remember we'd only been in the States less than a month, and the church wanted to have us come. And I'm like, oh, I don't really want to. I want to just be in my own little world and grieve. And God said, no, you're going to go. And you're going to give half the offering to Ukraine Aid. And I'm like, but God, I want to tell you, it pays to be obedient. I don't regret that I could be retired right now. I'm 60 years old, could have retired a year ago. But I'm not, and I'm okay with that because I love what I do. I love being a programmer, but I really love being a missionary. And where was I going with that? Oh, train derailed. You know what happens. Senior moments, they're already starting. Oh, it's bad. No, I'm kidding. But it pays to be obedient because you know what we saw when we visited churches? That we received healing because we shared our story. It was amazing to me. And we saw churches we visited before that we got offerings. They weren't bad. We got offerings at these churches. That blew me away. That we actually ended up with more money for our missions account because I was obedient than we would have if I'd have said no to God. It always pays to obey God. It doesn't matter what it is. So anyway, I visited Ukraine in 2006 with my pastor, who had been to Ukraine the year before. He's going to be here in March. Brad Wickerstein, he and Gail are going to be here. They're actually becoming missionaries to Ukraine finally. It's his fault that I'm there. So anyway, and so I went in 2006. When I got back, God really messed up my world. He started talking to me about being a missionary, and I'm like, God, this is me you're talking to. I'm a programmer. You wired me to be a programmer. What's wrong with you? I'm kind of bold that way, kind of dumb. And God and I had this conversation, and it really went that I realized I wasn't going to win. And I've read the Bible enough times at this point, I was in my early 40s, that I realized that saying no to God is a bad thing. I mean, look what happened to Jonah. I did not want to ride to Ukraine in a fish. Really wasn't my idea of a good time. And so I thought we better just say yes to God. And so we had this conversation for about a month. And then I went and talked to Denise, and I'm like, hey, guess what? God said to me. And you know what she said? Okay. That's amazing. And then she went and had her own conversation with God and said, you got to call me too. But we actually moved to Ukraine in 2010. So that's been home for the most part. And we're going to share some of what's happened in the last 6 years in a little bit. But first of all, I wanted Denise to talk about her family a little bit and about what it is for her to live in Ukraine. We want to show that first picture, if we could, please. Allie. That one.
It's a little bit older, but that's the one we have. Our daughters were 9 and 16 when we moved to Ukraine. So it was a kind of a traumatic time for them. Now they're 23, and Laura will be 31 in 2.5 weeks.
Yep.
And they're both in America. Laura lives in Minneapolis area here, and Hope lives in Dubuque, Iowa, and living with her boyfriend. And we have a granddaughter, Ruby.
Not how we wanted it.
No. Yes. Our daughters are not serving the Lord right now, and it breaks our heart. But I realized right away when our oldest daughter wrote us a letter when we were in Ukraine. She had just graduated North Central. She decided God wasn't real. And she didn't want to talk to her about it. She didn't want us to ask any questions or anything. So we don't talk about the elephant in the room. And it broke my heart. It's the first time an emotion ever hurt me physically. My chest hurt. And it affected me for a few days. And then finally I'm like, Denise, what are you doing? You can't do anything about it. You can't argue her into salvation. You can't yell her. You can't push her. You can't manipulate her. Salvation is an act of God. And it's His responsibility. My responsibility is to pray and intercede for them, but it's God's responsibility, and the act of salvation is on Him. Because people cannot respond unless God calls their name. And we have just been waiting. That's the hard part, is I was grabbing on and saying, how long will I have to wait, Lord? And I tell Him over and over again, I'm tired of waiting. But He's still working. He's doing more than we can see and we can feel. And someday I'm going to rejoice. And everybody's going to know. Because I'm going to tell them. I'm going to shout it from the rooftops. Our children have come home. And I wasn't going to share this today. Laura was only in Ukraine with us for 2 years. Hope was until she graduated, almost graduated, her senior year down in Apple Valley while we were itinerating. And then we went back to Ukraine. And it's interesting having adult children, let alone being in a different country and only seeing them every once in a while. This time when we returned to Ukraine, it's a whole new thing. There's some things I can't get in the store I used to be able to get into. God has provided a wonderful apartment for us in a new city. We live right in almost in the center of town. We're about 1 block from the Central Circle Park, and another block the other way is the Central Outside Market and grocery stores. And close to the circle is restaurants and stuff, so we can walk everywhere. Now, we love living in the center. If you asked me to live in the center of Minneapolis, I would have said, no, that's the last thing I want to do. But in that city, we really enjoy it. It doesn't feel like a big city. It's about 250,000 people, but it doesn't feel like it to us. God provided our apartment, and the only negative about our apartment, and I didn't want to get this apartment because it's on the 5th floor of a 5-story building. And anything less than 6 stories does not have an elevator. And so we have to walk those flights of stairs every single time. And when you go to the grocery store, you have many things to carry up the stairs. And so I try to limit how many times I go places. And when I do go to the grocery store and get more things, I figure out what's important to carry up with me and what's not important. I leave in the car for him to carry.
Or else I get a call. Come help me carry stuff up.
Yes. And God has blessed us. They were able to take an old Soviet apartment, Soviet style, and remodel it and build a half a story on the roof. So we have a 2-story apartment with 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a big living room. And Philip will tell you, God has used that living room, and because we're in the center of town, it's easier for people to get to us because they don't have to take a couple buses. They only have to take 1 bus to the middle of town. And it's interesting living in a country during war because at least 3 to 8 times a day or more, you hear air raid sirens. And everybody ignores them. It's just, other than some stores close, they make you check out real quick and close until the okay signal is put on, and then they open back up again. And so when I go into this big store that looks like Sam's Club or Costco, it's really just a big grocery store. I try to get the most important things first in case the air raid siren goes off and I leave because I don't want to have to drive 15 minutes to come back again some other time. And we have rolling blackouts, but praise God, we, for some reason, are an important line, and so they have never shut off our electricity. And we are so blessed, and I do not take that for granted. Across the street, in the stores and everything, there are permanent generators with little roofs on them and chained to something so that people don't steal them. And they have to use those to do their business when the electricity is off. I went to a mall in Poltava during the blackout. I didn't realize it was a blackout. And it is really weird going into a mall that's half dark. And some stores are more lit, some are not. Some of them have little flashlights here and there so you can see where you're going in the store and kind of see. And some of the stores, the grocery store was pretty lit, but at the same time, you couldn't use your credit card. You could only use cash because their system for credit cards wouldn't work. And every once in a while, especially in the summer when the windows are open, we could hear some anti-aircraft things going toot, 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 toot. So you know a drone or something's around there. You hear a boom in the background every once in a while. Usually everything that's hit is on the edge of town. Praise God for us. And sometimes they joke that Ukraine, that Poltava is not hit very much because we're there. God's protecting us. I don't know. I don't think we're God's favorite that way or anything like that, but they joke about that. And just life is different. When we travel, There's a checkpoint or a barricade to go in a city and out of a city, and we can travel freely. The young men don't travel as much because if you're on their list, they will try to pick you up right there. And so, yeah, a lot of the young men try not to travel as much as possible. And so it limits in the outside villages where those guys go. They try to stay close to home. And when they get that letter, they try not to go anywhere because they can get picked up anywhere. And that's the hardship of living in war. Is we got to know a young man when we moved there. He was injured. He was a soldier and injured. His grenade or something went off close to him, and he didn't get hurt with shrapnel, but just the sound of it did something to his head. And he had therapy done, and so he came to Philip's home group and things and got to know him. Great guy, and then he got better. So they sent him back, and Philip could hear from him until around Thanksgiving time. And then he didn't hear from him anymore. And then it was about a week or two later, we found out his family said that he's listed as missing in action. So just meeting people and then losing them, you know that every person in Ukraine has lost someone. And they're just tired of the war. Now, no, they don't want to give up their freedom. They don't want to give up their land. But it's a miracle they've lasted this long, I think. And it's just amazing what God has done. But to trust that God is going to take care of you during any circumstance. I remember when my mom had colon cancer the first time, and my husband called me on the phone when we found out after her colonoscopy. And he says, "How are you doing?" And I'm going, "I'm fine." I don't know if I was in shock or anything, but I said, either you trust God or you don't. There's no in between. And I trusted God that no matter what would happen, I would be okay. My mom would be okay. Everything would be okay. And so God has given us that trust and that peace. Because you would think if you hear air raid sirens so many times a day, that during the air raid sirens you would go, oh no, maybe something's going to happen. Or you hear a bomb, explosion. Mm-hmm. They have a Telegram group of the youth group, and whenever anybody hears anything, they go, "How's everybody doing?" And they check on each other. And we heard a couple of nights ago, maybe 3 now, there was a big explosion on the edge of town, and it hit half of an apartment building and blew it up. And so we knew it before we heard it on the news because they were saying, "Has anybody heard anything? Are you guys okay?" And stuff. So it's a little bit closer to home because of that. But we know God is faithful, and He is going to use this trauma to bring more people to Christ.
God is working. It's pretty amazing, actually, to see God at work in the midst of a war. People are coming to Christ. Many people are coming to Christ. I remember we visited one small town, and there's 2 churches there that we work with. They're part of our union. Oh, I probably should explain that. In Ukraine, they call them unions, not denominations. They call them unions. And so the group we work with, actually, the previous union we worked with kind of fell apart, and so now there's recreation of a new group, and it's actually working with the Canadian Assemblies of God, which is really interesting to me. I really like that. And so they're calling themselves the Pentecostal Assemblies of Ukraine, much like the Pentecostal Assemblies of Canada, which is fine. I don't really care. But it's really exciting to see what's happening in this, because they're working on being unified. And it's so fun to be part of a group that is working together for a common goal and supporting each other and not competing with each other. So refreshing. Anyway, and so what do we do there? We visit a different church every Sunday. Sometimes we visit village churches on Saturday or a Friday. Just depends. Visit home groups. I'm speaking a lot. There's some weekends I speak 4 times, sometimes only twice, sometimes only once. Just depends on where we are and what's going on. But I love it. Unfortunately for me, we lived in an area in the south central part of the country before that spoke primarily Russian. And because of the war, most people have switched to speaking Ukrainian. And they're not the same language. They're close. They're cousins. My poor wife does not understand Ukrainian hardly at all. I understand almost everything. Now, to translate, no way, can't do that. I can register and then it goes away. To speak it, no, I'm not doing that either. So I actually have a tutor that I'm working with to try to be able to speak Ukrainian because I want to be able to preach in Ukrainian like I preach in Russian. So I go to church and I say, please forgive me, but I cannot speak in Ukrainian. I say it all in Ukrainian. And then I say, and now I'm going to preach in Russian because that's all I got. And they forgive me because I'm American. So, but it's fun to watch. Went to this one town and we go there, and this church just recently joined our group, and they meet in this like an auditorium, this town auditorium, and we go in there, and I'm like, wow, there's gonna be a lot of people here. I'm pretty sure there were 150 people. 90% of them were over the age of 50. And most of those have come to Christ since the war started. So, in America, it's not really common for somebody over 50 to come to Christ. The statistics are, if they haven't come to Christ when they're young, they're probably not going to do it when they're old. It does happen, yes. But in Ukraine, because of the war, older people, my age, are coming to Christ. It's amazing. So that was fun. Sometimes they come because they're getting humanitarian aid and they don't really care about hearing the gospel. We were in another town recently, and there were probably 50 people in this church that last time I was there was 12. And I get done, I give the salvation altar call, and nobody wants to respond. All they want to do is get their packets. Okay, I got it. But at least you heard the gospel. The other thing that we do is we spend time with youth. I never thought being 60 years old I would be doing youth ministry. But I can tell you, I am having a blast. Yeah, I can tell I'm older than they are. They joke and say I'm only 18, just, going on 19. Well, thank you, but my body says otherwise. My crow's feet say otherwise, things like that. But I have a home group in our apartment for young men, and I've been having on average about 10. And it is fun to see how they are growing in Christ. It is fun to see they're reading the Bible more because I challenge them to read the Bible. It's fun to see them ask questions. It's fun to see them try to change things in their life that need to be changed. I try to meet with them as often as I can, which isn't very often, one-on-one, just to mentor them and say, okay, how are you doing in this area of your life? What's going on here? Do you have challenges? How can I pray with you? That's so important. I remember one Sunday, about a month and a half ago, one lady, she actually lives closer to Kharkiv, but she comes to help minister on the weekends, plays guitar and goes to villages and ministers and stuff. And she was trying to tell me how important it is, this ministry that I do for young men. And while she's talking to me, I had to stop and hug about 7 young men as they walked by to say hi to me. I'm like, yeah, I got your point. It is kind of important. We have had the youth leadership team meet in our apartment. They like to come to our apartment rather than going to the church to meet. Somehow it's more comfortable. Plus Denise makes popcorn, so they like that and whatever. So, you can't beat those kind of things. And the thing they like more than anything else in the world there is not me. It's not Denise. It's not my preaching. It's not my teaching. It's her cookies. They love her American cookies, and chocolate chip are the favorite. And it doesn't matter what kind of cookie it is, they like them. Now, if they have raisins in them, maybe not. But mostly they just love her cookies. So that's the tool I have used for a long time. You come to this home group, you get cookies or some kind of dessert. It doesn't matter. You're going to have something. They like it all. There's one guy, he goes home to his dad and he's like, Dad, we tried these cookies. They had cinnamon on them. They're snickerdoodles. They're so good. And his dad told me later, he goes, my mouth was watering just hearing him talking about these cookies, So when he got to try them for himself, like, oh yeah, those are really good, So it's pretty funny. They're kind of famous. And one of my friends, he's one of the youth leaders, and he says to me, he goes, one time I spoke there when we didn't live there, it was several years ago, and he said to me, they're not going to remember anything you said. They're going to remember Denise's cookies. I'm like, thank you for that encouragement, my friend. So the last 6 years have been interesting. We were itinerating in 2018 and 19. In November, we went back to Ukraine, November 2019. And we were there for a couple months. We had to go get our registration process done. We went to Warsaw to do that and had an awful time, but God was in that and whatever. And then we came back. And then Denise, because of COVID then, remember COVID started in the spring of 2020. And because of that, Denise was kind of concerned about her parents and wanted to visit her parents and whatever. So in the summer, after we had been quarantined for 12 weeks at home, just the two of us, I almost went stir crazy. I told my wife, I love you very much, but you're not enough. I always thought when I was young, I could be a hermit. I figured out I can't be a hermit. I need other people. And so she decided to go back to visit her parents in July of 2020. And I was in Ukraine doing what I do, and I started not feeling well. My legs started growing, liquid in there. And had a really bad pain in my lower back. Stopped going to the gym. Oh, let's show that next picture, please, Allie. So this is what I looked like in the spring of 2020. I had lost, about 80 pounds over 6 years. I was in the best shape of my life. I actually did some chin-ups. I was so proud of myself. But that summer, I had to stop going to the gym because just something wasn't right. I went to 2 youth camps. We were in tents in both of those camps, and the tents were about yay high. So I had to get down into the tent, and it was so painful. My lower back was just, I didn't know what I did to my I thought it was my spine. I thought it was something wrong. And yet I didn't want to go to the doctor there because the doctors there are not quite as good as they are in America. Let's just say America's medicine here and Ukraine's is like here. So anyway, and Denise told me when I talked to her, I said, it's really bad. The one weekend I was there visiting my friend, after the 2 camps, I went and visited in Poltava, where we live now, in the eastern part of the country, northeast. I was just in such pain and agony. And Denise said, you should just go to Kyiv and go to the doctor right away. And I'm like, I got to go home because my birthday's on Wednesday. My cell group is Wednesday night, and I promised them I'd make a chocolate cake for my birthday. Well, I went home on Tuesday. By 1 o'clock in the morning, I was in such agony. I had a bad pain right here. I thought, appendicitis. What else could it be, right? Called my landlady, and at 1 o'clock in the morning, I called her. Oh, excuse me, please, but you got to help me. And then that was my experience with the Ukrainian medical system. The ambulance came. When you go to the hospital, you have to bring your own sheets, your own bedding, your own pillow, your own everything. They don't provide anything. They don't even provide food. So my landlady had to bring me food once in a while, even though I wasn't hungry. And I laid in the hospital for 2 days. There is no air conditioning. There's no Wi-Fi. My telephone internet didn't even work. And it was my birthday that day. Couldn't talk to my wife, couldn't talk to my dad, none of that kind of stuff. And I had roommates, and there's no curtains. There were 5 beds, only 3 of them were ever occupied. I got to see more than I ever wanted to see. It was absolutely insane. I needed to, in the morning, I actually was at 2 different hospitals, a long story, but when you go in the ambulance, you have to climb up into the ambulance. I'm in pain. I'm carrying my big bag of stuff. Into the ambulance I go. We go to the first hospital. Nobody helps me with my bag. There's no wheelchair. I had to carry my bag down a long corridor. Everybody who has to talk to me has been sleeping. They're angry at me because I woke them up. First hospital said, we can't help him. Go to the other hospital. That hospital said, we can't help you. Go back to the other hospital. It was just nuts. So I finally got to in my room about, 5 in the morning. I had two people yell at me because I didn't follow directions. And I'm like, excuse me, I'm in pain. I'm a foreigner. Give me a break. I haven't been sleeping. Just because you're angry doesn't mean you can be yelling. Anyway, but God was with me that day. I read my Bible, I prayed, I slept, I thought, and repeated the process all day long. And it was a good day. A very good day. I wouldn't have thought so. God was with me, and that was the beginning of my journey, and to find out that I had cancer. My wife was still in America. I had some tests done. Nobody in Ukraine could tell me, other than my doctor that I had at the hospital. And the reason I stayed in the hospital was because they wanted to do a CAT scan. And I had to stay at the hospital to save my place in line, basically. It was kind of dumb. I said to the doctor, can't we just pretend I'm here? I know that's possible. And he said, no. Anyway, so next picture. So ended up coming home to America in September of 2020. After Denise got back to Ukraine, she helped me go back because she wanted me to go to America. And I said, honey, I can't do it by myself already. That's how bad I was. And I had a trip that was very, very difficult. I was so bloated from here on down. And I was so skinny from here on up. I looked like a concentration camp victim, really. Except for down here, I was very large. And the last time I preached 3 times in that weekend, and I had to sit down every time. But I lost my hair, had chemo. They told me I had lymphoma just the end of September 2020. And I went through 6 rounds of chemo. I had COVID after the first round. Not a bad case, thankfully. But that's what I looked like in December of that year. So after a couple of courses of chemotherapy, I can tell you this. God kept his promises. I'm going to read a couple verses for you. Isaiah 43, verses 1, 2, and 4. But now, O Jacob, listen to the Lord who created you. O Israel, the one who formed you says, do not be afraid, for I have ransomed you. I have called you by name, you are mine. When you go through deep waters, I will be with you. When you go through rivers of difficulty, you will not drown. When you walk through the fire of oppression, you will not be burned up. The flames will not consume you. Others were given in exchange for you. I traded their lives for yours because you are precious to me. You are honored, and I love you. I went through this process. God was with me every step of the way. One more picture to show you. And that was during the second round of chemotherapy, sitting in the bed. You see my face was very skinny. That's how I looked, yes. Now I'm fat and sassy again, so all is well. But my dad was dying of cancer at the time that I was going through chemo. He had just finished chemo and it wasn't working anymore. Got to see him in between my last 2 chemotherapy treatments. And then he died after the last one, and I got to preach at his funeral because I had enough energy. I felt good. And then there was times that I've asked in the last 4 years, God, why am I still around? I know so many people who have died of cancer, and I'm still around. I feel great. God is so faithful. The only thing that I have that remains is I have neuropathy in my toes. Sometimes it's worse than others. And my feet do not tolerate cold at all anymore. Other than that, I feel great. I go to the gym every day of the week, Monday through Friday. God is faithful. When we are obedient to him, he takes care of us. When the war started and we had to leave, I told God, if we're not supposed to go back, take this burden away from me. That's the right thing to ask, right? You know what happened to my burden for Ukraine? It grew and it grew and it grew. And I said, God, how are we going to get there? My leaders don't want me to go there. They say, no, you can't go. And I'm like, I got to go somewhere. They told us we had to go somewhere. So we decided to go to Warsaw, Poland. Well, that might as well have been in the desert, quite honestly. We lived there for 6 months. Warsaw is a great city. It's a beautiful city. But I was bored. We were part of a big Ukrainian church, but I didn't have anything to do ministry-wise, really. And it doesn't mean I didn't minister. I got to know some of the young guys, teenage guys. I got to know a man at the gym that just, God does things in strange ways. So I know we had an impact, but it felt like the backside of the desert for me because I still wanted to go back to Ukraine. We visited Ukraine a year ago to go get some stuff from our house. And when we were there, I'm like, we're not going to drive 2 days and just go get some stuff and go back. We're going to go spend time with friends. And so we went to Poltava, where we're living now, and I told them, I said, if our organization lets us, we're going to move here this spring. When we moved to Warsaw, our landlord wanted a 3-year lease. I looked at him and said, it's going to be 6 months, or we're going to find another place to live. He agreed. I had to pay more, but he agreed. Because I just had this sense. 2 days after we signed the lease, I get a note from our leaders. After the first of the year, if you want to go back to Ukraine, you can. I'm like, why did I just sign a lease? And so that's how I know we were supposed to be in Warsaw. There was a reason that we were there. And if it was only for this one man that I met at the gym that got saved, that's okay with me. It was only for the young guys that I got to know and encourage them to walk with God. That's okay with me. It's worth it. And when we told them we were going to hopefully be moving back to Ukraine in January a year ago, they're like, oh, praise God. And then in May, when our lease was up, we moved back to Ukraine. And our landlord really liked this. And he's like, are you sure you want to go back? There's a war there, you know. Yeah, I know there's a war there. So people look at us kind of like we're weird. Even in Ukraine, the Christians are glad we're there, but other people are like, why in the world do you live in Ukraine? We have peace. We're in the center of God's will for us. And it doesn't matter if we hear a boom off in the distance. We're okay. We can hear the sirens go off, we go to sleep. We hear a boom off in the distance, we go to sleep. It doesn't matter. Because God told us we're supposed to be there. And we're so glad to be back. God is at work. There are churches that have had to take out walls. There are churches that have had to add on. There are churches that meet out in the cold because they don't have room inside. They don't quite get the idea of 2 services a lot of times. So that's the other thing that they kind of maybe have to work on. But God is at work. When you go to a village and you look at these people and you say, wow, none of you knew God 6 years ago. None of you knew God 3 years ago, but now you gave your life to Christ. It's awesome being a part of that. Seeing what God is doing. And it's because we were obedient. Going back. What there? Oh, yes. The church main church we work with in Poltava, where we live, and I apologize, I don't have a map, but if you look at a map, Kyiv is in the middle center, and we're 4 hours southeast of that, directly southeast. So, and then another couple hours to Kharkiv, where they bomb a lot. In our area, for some reason, the bombs go over us to Sumio region. They don't hit our region a lot, except for more in the south, but they did bomb us last September, and they did bomb us just a couple days ago. So God takes care of us. We actually visited our old city before Christmas. We were there for a youth gathering that the churches were doing together. And so we go there for that. And the night before we went, I heard from some friends there, it's really loud here. They had bombed badly that night. We went there the next night, and it was quiet, except for about 11:30, we heard a boom. They hit a house. Not in our area, but we heard it. Because when it's quiet outside, because of martial law, nobody's out after 10 or 11 o'clock at night. It's really quiet in the streets. You hear everything. Anyway, so then after that, it was quiet, and then we left, and then they started bombing again the next night after we left. I'm like, well, praise God, it wasn't while we were there. But I'm not afraid. But the church we work with, they have planted 10 churches since the start of the war, and they're all within about an hour from the main church. And these are people who are not pastors who go and minister. They're what they call missionaries, home missionaries. And the church we work with has a missionary school. It meets for 3 months from August to October. Last year I got the privilege of teaching at the school, being part of their lives. It was fun. I loved it. And even though I spoke Russian and had to translate stuff from Ukrainian to Russian so I could teach it to them, they still liked me. It was a lot of fun. But to see these guys that they go to church on Sunday for themselves, but Saturday or Friday or Wednesday, they're going and leading a home group, or they're going and leading the service in a village nearby. It's amazing to see what God is doing. And it's a privilege for us to be a part of that. I never dreamt that I would be preaching, ever. My dad had dreams that he was going to preach to crowds of people. He never did. He preached sometimes, but not to large crowds. That's me. And I don't care if it's a small church, big church, it doesn't matter to me. Numbers don't matter. What matters is what God is doing. And if I'm doing what God asked me to do, if I'm going where God asked me to go, that's all that matters. Because I'm not responsible for results. God is. So if I live my life as God wants me to, if I say what I'm supposed to say or don't say what I'm not supposed to say, God will take care of the rest. Obedience. Paul said in Romans 12, King James, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, give yourselves as a living sacrifice. What does that mean? Jesus said, if anybody wants to follow me, pick up their cross daily. What does that mean? That means that I take my desires, my wants, my wishes, and I lay them down at the cross. And I say, God, I want to do what you want me to do. If that means I got to take a microphone and preach, okay, I'll do it. When God called me to be a missionary, I was afraid of a microphone. Not that I couldn't talk. I just didn't like talking in front of people. I played piano. My fingers did all the talking. I didn't want to. I don't care anymore. It doesn't matter because I'm doing what God asked me to do. And He equipped me so that I'm doing what He asked me to do because I said, yes, God. The one thing about God that sometimes makes me crazy, maybe for you guys as well, is that He doesn't follow my schedule. And usually, in the end, almost always in the end, I think that's a good thing. I forgot to tell you, after I got done with my cancer treatment and stuff, we moved Denise's parents into independent living apartment and sold their house. And God used that process to help make me stronger physically again, because when I finished chemo, I was so weak. When I found that I had no cancer left in March of 2021, I could barely walk 5 minutes away from the house and back again, and I was exhausted. But within a week, I was walking 40 minutes. And God used that process. We went back to Ukraine in June of 2021. And you know, when the war started in the end of February 2022, we were driving out of Ukraine. I got to tell you a miracle about that. Just a second, I'll come back to that. We were driving out of Ukraine, and I said to God, God, I'm mad at you. Anybody else been mad at God? Did He get offended? No. Is He afraid when we're honest with Him? No. They say, boy, you're stupid. Boom, you're done. No, he doesn't do that. He loves us anyway. I said, I'm mad at you because you allowed me to get cancer, knowing there was going to be a war, knowing that I would have to leave. And I was gone for 9 months out of Ukraine when I could have been doing your work here. And I drove along for a while, and then pretty soon I went, God, I'm sorry. I'm wrong. I'm stupid, like usual. Because you allowed me to go through the hardest thing in my life so that I will go back to Ukraine and share about your faithfulness, your goodness in my life through that journey, knowing that those people are going to go through the hardest thing of their lives. And I had no clue. I never cried. I never asked God, why me? I wasn't afraid. And I really never doubted that we'd return to Ukraine, although I was days that I really didn't know if I was even going to live. It felt like sometimes. But God is faithful. Anyway, the miracle God did for us. So we have a Speed the Light car. Speed the Light is the arm of the Assemblies of God that the youth buy vehicles and other things for missionaries. And so we have a Speed the Light car that the youth of Minnesota bought for us back in 2014. And the title was in the name of a seminary in Kyiv. Well, while I had cancer, they changed, I had a document that allowed us to drive the car out of the country. But while we were in America for my cancer treatment, this seminary changed their name, so they had to redo all their documents. When we got back and finally got re-registered again, by fall, then the president of the seminary was back in America. And nobody else could help us with this special document we needed. So there was no way that we could drive out of the country if a war started. I didn't tell my wife because I didn't want her to be concerned. I usually don't hide stuff from her, but that one I decided I'm just going to keep that one quiet. And just said, God, you got to take care of us. In January of 22, she said something, well, at least we can drive out of the country if a war happens. I said, well, we can't exactly. And she's like, what? We got to do something. I said, honey, we can't do anything. I've already tried everything I know. The gal that works at the seminary, she tried everything she knew to do. So all we can do is trust God. About 2 weeks before the war started, the president of Ukraine, of the seminary, came back to Ukraine to take care of some important business, one of which was giving the presidency to a Ukrainian. The other one was to take care of the vehicles that were in the seminary's name, and ours was one of them. But he did his vehicle first, and ours was next. And so I got a note from the secretary there, and she said that next week you can come. You can come Friday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, doesn't matter. And I said, well, I got cell group on Wednesday, so I really wanted to do it on Thursday, the 24th of February. And I just felt like we needed to go on the 22nd, Tuesday. So we drove up to Kyiv on the 22nd, 6-hour drive up there. We did our business in 4 hours up there. We got the title changed into my name. We have a card in the car that says it's my name, so we can drive out of the country with it. And we left Kyiv at 4 o'clock, Tuesday the 22nd, 36 hours before the war started. If I had waited till Thursday, we would have had no out. God is never late. But looking back, I say to God, that was cutting it kind of close. But thank you that you're never late. And I somehow had the wisdom to go on the 22nd, not the 24th. He takes care of us. And I'll be honest with you, I was not thinking there was going to be a war. There was not one Ukrainian I talked to that thought a war was going to happen. Not one. Yes, I know people in the government thought, but the common people, they all said the same thing. There's not going to be a war. So I went with that philosophy. Our leaders told us that we were supposed to buy gas cans and have extra gas on hand just in case and all that kind of stuff. Well, did we do it? No, we didn't do that because it's not going to be a war. Denise said we should, and I said, I don't think we have to, so whatever. And we didn't. So I admit, dumb. Okay? God takes care of us even when we're stupid. After the war started, they started doing it so you could only buy 5 gallons of gas at a time. Well, how are you going to make a 12-and-a-half-hour trip if you can only buy 5 gallons at a time? And there were lines to buy gas at most gas stations. So a 12-and-a-half-hour trip is going to take a lot longer if you don't have any gas. So, well, thankfully, our landlady's ex-husband, because he decided to live with drugs and not with his family, they got divorced, and sadly enough. But anyway, and he actually helped me. He found somebody who had a used gas can, and he had an old one as well. And so we were able to just rinse those out and then go fill them with gas, and we had gas along with us. Now, the old one he had, it didn't seal very good. So we had to put saran wrap with a rubber band to make sure that it wasn't splashing in the car. That was really fun. And these cans themselves, they're metal, about yay high, yay wide, yay deep, and they're heavy without gas. So we put the 5 gallons of gas in those things. And when the war started that Thursday morning, we had cell group the night before, and the guys that came to my home group, because the transport didn't run late enough at night, they usually spent the night at my house. So we had anywhere from 3 to 6 guys at our house a lot of times on Wednesday nights. Feed him breakfast in the morning. One had to go to work early, so I'd get up with him, get him breakfast. He'd leave. I'd go back to bed for a half hour, 45 minutes, wake up the next one. He had to go to school or whatever it was. So it was just kind of crazy. But that morning, I got a phone call from our regional director, who has never in our whole experience as missionaries called me, never once. And I answered the phone, and he hung up. And I'm like, that's weird. It was 5:30 in the morning. That's really weird. So then I thought, well, I better look at my phone. Maybe there's something there. So I look at my phone. I'm like, oh, there's a message from him. And the message said this: given the current situation, don't you think it's time to leave? I'm like, oh, the war started. How nice. Anyway, so Denise wanted to leave that day because of the question about gas, of where we have enough gas to be able to get where we needed to go. And I said, no, we have to do this in an organized fashion. We can't just willy-nilly get up and go. We've got to at least do some things wise. And I had some important things I wanted to take care of. So we decided to leave Saturday morning instead. So we got up really early Saturday morning, left by 5:30. And long story short was that we were in the car for 87 hours. We were at the northern border of Romania for 2.5 days in line. Yes, we stunk by the time that was over. Yes, we had to use the woods as our bathroom. And as Denise would say, there's no bushes and trees do not have leaves in February or March. So anyway, but thank God we got out where we never felt like we were in danger, but it was just a very long, arduous journey. But God was with us, and whenever we had to get gas, we just stopped, got out a gas can. We had to take a funnel from home because we didn't have anything else. And so Denise held the funnel, bless her heart, and I held the can. And I couldn't see because the can was heavy. And so we're pouring the gas, and she's getting all over her hand. She's like, more, less, more, less. It was a lot of fun. Anyway, and we just did that twice. And both times we didn't have to wait in line. And there was like 20 cars in line. So thank God he took care of us. And then we got to buy one more time closer to the border, and there wasn't a line there. So I'm like, God took care of us. But even in my stupidity, God provided, because my God is Jehovah Jireh. He's a provider. And we're obedient to him. He takes care of us, even when we're stupid. I don't know about other men, but I admit that I tend to be kind of stupid. And I know women can be too. It's a human thing. We think we know better than God. But we can trust God. If you've read Leviticus, there's a lot of details there, right? My God is a God of details. And I know I can trust God with the details of my life because he wrote Leviticus. And I know he's a detail God. I've seen God work in my life, on me, through me, in ways that I never dreamed possible. And it is a privilege for us to be your missionaries in Ukraine. When we moved we actually were supposed to move to Crimea. In 2014, we planned to live in Crimea, but when Russia took Crimea, we couldn't do that. And then we're going back to mainland Ukraine. So in the last 10 years, been a lot of stuff. But we ended up going back to Krivoy Rog where we lived before. And the reason that we did is because God called us to go back there. So we were obedient and we saw God save that year, 2015 to 2018, we saw God save over 300 people in our ministry. And it isn't because Phil's such a great guy, it's because God's a great God. And blew us away. It's been different since then, but recently it's been better again, which is awesome. But I say that to say the first guy that I met in 2015 that really connected with, he was a young man in an English club that I only went to twice. He got saved, easiest salvation ever. Can I know God personally, asked me? Yes, you can. I'll explain to you how. And that was it. And he actually volunteered to be in the army, and he died in December of 2022. That was so hard on me when he died. Like Denise said, everybody knows somebody who died. And there's a lot of people who have left Ukraine because they have kids so they can get out, or other people have paid to get out. It is what it is. But it's hard because I don't want to see people leave Ukraine. I want to see them come back. But I know once they get a taste of the West, they're not probably going to come back, sadly enough. God is faithful. If I heard my dad say it once, I heard him say it 1,000,000 times. God is always faithful. One of my favorite verses in the Bible, Jeremiah 32:17. It says, Jeremiah prays, and he says, Lord, nothing is too difficult for you. And then 10 verses later, God answered me. He said, I am the God of all the peoples of the earth. Is anything too hard for me? Nothing is too hard for God. Doesn't matter what you're going through. Your situation is not too hard for God. If he's asking you to do something, do it, because obedience is most important. And trust him for his provision. He'll do it in his time, in his way. And it won't look like you want it to. It'll be even better. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today. We appreciate your financial partnership with us, your prayer partnership. Without the prayer, so important. I wish we had prayer cards to give you. We don't, because we're not actually itinerating. So anyway, we're all out anyway. But God bless you. Thank you, Pastor Troy.
Thank you. One word of advice that I will give you that I learned a long time ago. Very often the Holy Spirit speaks in a voice that sounds like your wife. And the other truism that I heard throughout what you were saying is something that my father-in-law says a lot. God is never early and he's never late. He's always on time. No matter what we think. And no matter what we think it should look like. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being faithful. There is... Everybody who knows me knows that my heart is for missions. I say it often that missionaries go places that we won't go, and they do things that we won't do. So thank you for what you do. This isn't a normal itineration service, so they don't have a table in the back. But still, we would like to be able to support them, and we don't normally pass a plate, but if you would write a check and put it in the box and just put Reed's in the memo so that we know, and we will get a check and put it in their AGWM account and help support what they're doing in a very hard place. And half of it will go to Ukraine aid, which is a necessary thing. So, Lord, thank you so much for who you are. Thank you for what you do. Thank you that there is no part of this world that you do not see. Thank you that you are in control and we can trust you. And even when it looks like you're out of control, we can trust that you are good. We can put our faith in you. We can follow you. You will never lead us astray. Thank you, Lord. We do love you. We praise you. We give you all the glory. In Jesus'